We're going to solve number 1. We have m squared plus 6m minus 43 is equal to negative 7. We're going to solve it by making the left-hand side a perfect square. Before we do that, we're going to add 43 to both sides. So you have m squared plus 6m equals 36. Now, in order for us to make it into a perfect square, we need to find that c value. So the c value is done by getting the coefficient b and divided by 2, and then you square it. So c is equal to 3 squared, which gives you 9. So you're going to add 9 to both sides. So you have m squared plus 6m plus 9 is equal to 36 plus 9. If you look at the left-hand side, that is a perfect square. So what do you have? M plus 3 times m plus 3, and that's equal to 45. So instead of having m plus 3 times m plus 3, you're going to have m plus 3 to the second power, which is equal to 45. And then if you have a square, you want to get the square root of both sides. So m is equal to plus or minus the square root of 45. And if we were to simplify, it'd be m is equal to I forgot something right here real quick. So this is m plus 3 is equal to square root of 45. You subtract 3 from both sides. So m is equal to negative 3 plus or minus square root of 45. Square root of 45 can be simplified. So you have m is equal to negative 3 plus or minus the square root of 9 times 5. And we know that 9, you can find the square root of 9 is 3. So the two values are negative 3 plus or minus 3 square root of 5. So we have p squared minus 20p minus 63 is equal to 6. And we're going to solve this by completing the square. I do want initially my variables on the left side, so I'm going to add 63 to both sides. And I'll erase this so it won't get in the way. So we have p squared minus 20p is equal to 69. We got to find c. C is a value that's going to complete this square. That's going to complete this into a perfect square. So c is going to be negative 20 divided by 2 squared. So c is equal to 100. So I have p squared minus 20p plus 100 is equal to 69 plus 100. So here you're going to have p minus 10 raised or squared, but I'm going to go ahead and say it right. P minus 10 times p minus 10 equals 169. So you have p minus 10 to the second power is equal to 169. Get the square root of both sides. So you have p minus 10 is equal to the square root of 169 is 13, but it can also be negative. Solve for p. In this case, p can be 23 or p can be negative 3. Number 3, we're going to solve by completing the square. Once again, I want to have the variables on one side. I want these variables on one side. And so what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to address that negative 33. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add 33 to both sides. And then what I get is v squared plus 6v equals 39. Then what you're going to do is you're going to find C. C is going to make this into a perfect square. C is going to make this into a perfect square. In other words, when I say perfect square, it's going to make it into parentheses times parentheses. It'll be the same factor, and it'll equal to 39. So you get 6. So you have 6 divided by 2, and then you have to square it. So C is equal to 3 squared, which gives you 9. So I'm going to go ahead and erase this. So what I have is V squared plus 6V plus 9 equals 39 plus 9. Okay, so this will be V plus 3 times V plus 3, because that's a perfect square. How can I check? 3 times 3 is 9. V times 3 is 3V. 3 times 3V is 3V, so that's 6V, and then V times V is V squared. Equals 9 plus 9 is 8. 18. So it's 48. So what you have here is V plus 3 raised to the second power is equal to 48. Now this, you can solve this equation by finding the square root of both sides. So you have V plus 3 is equal to plus or minus the square root of 48. 48 can be simplified. V plus 3 is equal to plus or minus square root of 16 times 3. So V plus 3 is equal to plus or minus square root of 16 times the square root of 3. Subtract 3 from both sides, so V is equal to negative 3 plus or minus 4 square root of 3. We are going to solve this quadratic by completing the square. Once again, we want the variables on one side. In other words, the a squared plus 4a we want by itself. The negative 48 we want to address. And how do we address that? We add 48 to both sides. So we have a squared plus 14a is equal to 58. Now we have to find C, what's going to make it a perfect square. You have to get the coefficient in this case, b. You get the coefficient b divided by 2 and then squared. So 14 divided by 2 is 7. 7 squared gives you 49. So what you're going to do is you're going to add 49 to both sides. So we have a squared plus 14a equals 58 plus 49. So the left-hand side here, this left-hand side is a perfect square. So what do we have? We have a plus 7 times a plus 7 is equal to 58 plus 49. 58 plus 49 gives you 107. So you have a plus 7 raised to the second power gives you 107. And then you get the square root of both sides. So you have a plus 7 is equal to plus or minus square root of 107. Subtract 7 from both sides. So it's negative 7 plus or minus square root of 107. We're going to solve 6 by factoring. So we're going to rewrite this as everything on one side. So you're going to subtract n and subtract 12. So you have n squared minus n minus 12 is equal to 0. You are going to find the factors of negative 12. that when you add up will give you the middle coefficient, which is negative 1. So you're going to list all the factors. So you have 4, you have negative 4 times 3, 3 times negative 4. So that gives you negative 12. That gives you negative 12. But now you got to check when you add them or subtract. When you add them, will they become negative 1? So you have negative 4 plus 1 gives you negative 4 plus 3 gives you negative 1. Negative 3 plus 4 gives you 1. So it should be the factor negative 4 and 3. So these are the factors of 12. And you want to figure out the ones that are going to add up to give you the middle coefficient, which is negative 1. So in this case, the factors are n, you have n, and you have negative 4, and then you have n plus 3 equals 0. So now you have the first factor, which is n minus 4. The second factor is n plus 3. That equals 0. So now you have n minus 4 is equal to 0. N plus 3 equals 0. Add 4 to both sides, so n equals 4. Subtract 3 from both sides, so n equals negative 3. So once again, we're going to solve this by factoring. So we have r squared plus r minus 56, since I want everything on one side equals 0. So now you got to give me the factors of 56. I think they're 8 and 7. 8 times 7 gives you 56. So we have 8 times 7. Remember, it has to be negative. So let's say negative 7, then we have negative 8 times 7. So we're going to subtract 8 minus 7 gives you 1. Negative 8 plus 7 gives you negative 1. So the one that you're going to use will be 8. The factor is 8 and negative 7 because that gives you the middle coefficient. So now what you're going to do is you're going to write your first parentheses and your second parentheses. Since it's a factor of, there's two factors, there's two answers because the degree is 2. We have r minus 8 and then we have r plus 7. We're going to set each of these equal to 0. So r minus 8 equals 0. R plus 7 equals 0. We're going to add 8 to both sides. So our first answer is r equals 8. And our second answer is r equals negative 7. There's a mistake here. It should have been plus 8. And this is r minus 7. So this is r plus 8. And this is r minus 7. So we're actually subtracting 8 from both sides. So our first answer is negative 8. And we're actually adding 7 to both sides. So r is equal to 7. B squared minus 1 is a difference of perfect squares. So it's going to be b plus 1 times b minus 1 equals 0. So b plus 1 equals 0, b minus 1 equals 0. So you subtract 1 from both sides, so b equals negative 1. And you add 1 to both sides, so b equals 1. This is a difference of perfect squares. We're going to use the quadratic formula to solve these equations. Before we start, we have 2p squared minus 1 equals 0. You have to identify the a coefficient. In this case, it's 2. You have to identify the b coefficient. In this case, it's 0. And then the c coefficient is negative 1. So our formula is negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 2 times a divided by we're going to solve these equations using the quadratic formula. Remember that you have ax squared plus bx plus c is equal to 0. You first have to identify a, b, c. We know that the formula is x equals negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac divided by 2 times a. So in our problem, a is going to be 2. B, we don't have a middle coefficient, so that's going to be 0. And c is negative 1. So all you have to do now is substitute. So you have x equals plus or minus square root 0 squared minus 4 times a times c divided by 2 times 2. So we have 0 squared is gone. We have plus or minus square root. Negative 4 times 2 is negative 8. Negative 8 times 1 is 8. 8 over 4. We know that the square root of 8 is the same thing as saying square root of 4 to the square root of 2 divided by 4. So you have 2 times the square root of 2 over 4. That's plus or minus. So that simplifies to plus or minus square root of 2 over 2. 10, we have to have it in standard form, so we have to move the 2a to the left side. So we have 3a squared minus 2a plus 2 is equal to 0. We have to identify the a value, or the coefficient is 3, b coefficient is negative 2, and c coefficient is 2. So now the formula is negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4 times ac divided by 2a. So the value of b is going to be negative 2, but there's a negative. So a negative and a negative becomes positive 2 plus or minus square root. b is negative 2, negative 2 squared minus 4. A is going to be 3, and then c is 2 divided by 2a, which is going to be 3. So we have 2 plus or minus square root. Negative 2 to the second power is 4, minus 4 times 3 is 12. 12 times 2 is 24. Divided by 2 times 3 is 6. So we have 2 plus or minus square root of negative 20 over 6. Square root of negative 20 can be simplified. So you have 2 plus or minus square root of 4 times the square root of negative 5 over 6. Square root of 4. Square root of 4 is 2. So you get 2 plus or minus 2 square root of negative 5 over 6. It simplifies to a third. So you have 1 plus or minus square root of negative 5 over 3. Square root of negative 5 is an imaginary number. So this should be I square root of 5. So your answer will be 1 plus or minus I square root of 5 over 3.